So Captain America Brave New World premiered recently, and to no one's surprise, this flick was less than stellar. I wouldn't say it was quite She-Hulk levels of bad, but it is below average nonetheless. Here's why. First off, there is no Captain America in this Captain America movie. They call this guy Captain America, but he ain't it. Anthony Mackie made a point to sour everyone's opinion of him on the press tour.
To me, Captain America represents a lot of different things, and I don't think the term, America should be one of those representations.
Why did they take away your white half helmet?
Because I told them that I was never wearing that shit again, dude. That was hard. It was with the heat, the sweat, the fogged up glasses.
Gets paid millions of dollars for this job, but can't be bothered to sweat for it. I couldn't think of a less deserving man for the role. The film goes out of its way to say that he is not a super soldier like the real Captain America, but you wouldn't know it by watching him fight. He whips and kicks that shield around like it's a weightless frisbee, and he seems to be impervious to all types of damage, as he gets stabbed a bunch, has missiles explode in his face, gets ping-ponged around by the Red Hulk, and he doesn't seem to react to any of said damage whatsoever. There's even a point where the Red Hulk swings a pole at him and he catches it with his bare hands, which is pretty absurd for a normal man to do. The fact that his arms don't instantly turn to jelly makes this scene absurd. The Daredevil series was compelling in part because it was shown how exhausting, painful, and difficult it would be to regularly fight crime as a relatively normal man. But you won't see that in this movie. Even though Falcon used to be more than willing to use firearms to get the win, he will now handicap himself in order to make this shield a thing, which is made even more awkward when they establish that his wings are made of vibranium now, and given that said wings can pretty much cover his entire body, the shield is only there for symbolic reasons and is not actually that useful. How did he get vibranium wings? The same way he gets everything else. It was just given to him for free. His superpower is to receive handouts. That also includes his shield, his costume, his drones that do his fighting for him, and now his sidekick. This is Falcon 2, and he is just here now. We are told that he and Sam are already great friends, so you just have to accept that. He already got his wings off screen, and these two are apparently so close that they live together, because apparently the middle-aged Captain Falcon can't make rent on his own, so he needs a roommate.
You're so old. Where's your wife? Go home to your family, dude.
Sam is treated like this guy's superior, given that he is meant to be wiser and more experienced, but the only practical reason why he's the better hero is because he has the better stuff. If Falcon 2 also had vibranium wings, he wouldn't struggle as much as he does in this film. Plus, Falcon was meant to be Captain America's partner, not his sidekick. But the modern writers seem to fail to understand that, which is why we're in the situation that we're in. And for some perspective, they deemed this irrelevant, unwanted copycat, who has barely any comics to his name, a higher priority to put on screen than characters like the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Ghost Rider, or Blade. Daredevil and Punisher don't get to have movies, but this tool gets to skip the entire line. Isn't that nice? Bucky can't be involved in this movie because he's apparently running for Congress for some reason. Not sure how, considering most of the world views him as a dangerous terrorist, but whatever. That said, he has just enough time for a cameo, in which he will validate Captain Falcon and tell the audience how great he is. Then he will undercut the whole thing with a joke about how he doesn't write his own speeches. Because, as always, we can never have a single moment of sincerity in these films.
Since when were they read?
But the biggest joke of all has to be the existence of the leader. Though if you're a movie-only fan, you'll likely have no idea what I'm talking about, because the leader as a name is never used once. When he has an opportunity to introduce himself, he calls himself the hero for some reason and refuses to elaborate. But this person in question is in fact Samuel Stearns, back from his previous appearance in 2008. That's right, it only took 17 years, but the dude is finally back. Children have been born and picked out colleges in that amount of time, and the wait was definitely not worth it because he was used horribly in this film. His design is atrocious and pathetic. Instead of the big brain genius he is meant to be, he looks like rotten lettuce, and he acts like it too. Where instead of being as smart as the Hulk is strong, like he's supposed to be, having strong mental powers and creating deadly machines, no, in this movie he'll hack into phones once in a while, he'll make a heart exploding device that's less effective than a knife, and he will make a Hulk creating drug that will take effect over the course of several years, while having all his big evil plans get thwarted pretty easily. He is another major entry into the great MCU villain problem. And this one especially hurts, because this is no small-time obscure villain. This is one of the Hulk's greatest enemies, whom we've been waiting to see for ages. And when he returns, the Hulk isn't even there to face him. Where is the Hulk? Who knows, probably still twerking with She-Hulk. Leader is here, Betty is here as a last-minute cameo, and Ross is here as President Red Hulk. But the real Hulk is nowhere to be found. Instead, we have to pretend to care about the Falcon squared. The reason Red Hulk is here is because Ross was dying, and looked to Stearns for help while simultaneously using him as a fall guy for the Abomination incident, and is keeping him imprisoned. As a form of revenge, Stearns secretly added gamma radiation to the cure of Ross's sickness, leading him to become the Red Hulk years later. So kids, the lesson here is to not take drugs from supervillains that you wrongly imprisoned. You idiot. And all things considered, this is a bit of an odd form of revenge, as having the power of a Hulk is something that Ross wanted for a while, but becoming one makes being a president pretty difficult, so I guess there's that. Ross himself is not quite as cartoonishly evil as one might expect him to be. Harrison Ford plays him more so as old and confused, rather than hot-tempered and decisive, as the character is more known to be. In other words, he's more of a Brandon than an Orange. Now to be clear, I am no fan of Red Hulk. I find his presence to be derivative and unnecessary. We already have a Hulk, and he deserves more screen time. With all that in mind, this film manages to completely waste Red Hulk as a concept. For starters, Rolk's identity was meant to be a big mystery when he was first introduced, with a big investigation being conducted before it was finally discovered that he was Ross. But this movie spoils that reveal in the trailers, and makes it plainly obvious that Red Hulk will show up during the entirety of its runtime. Also, unlike the real Hulk, the angrier Red Hulk gets, the hotter he gets, which is briefly displayed in the movie, but it hardly matters as a power and doesn't really get used. Furthermore, Red Hulk is supposed to be in control of himself, which gives him big advantages over the real Hulk, as contrived as that might be, but he is meant to be able to make plans, use guns, and strategize. But in the movie, he is yet another Savage Hulk, being not much different from the real one, which just makes you wonder why they didn't just make a movie with the real Hulk. They have all the Hulk characters, but no Hulk. And for some reason they thought Captain Falcon would be a suitable villain for this story. Most likely because this character isn't popular enough to have his own villains, so just like his equipment, he has to take them from someone else. And you may be wondering, how on earth is Captain Falcon meant to beat a Hulk? Well, he can't. So the writers make up this idea that Ross and Betty love to walk through blossom trees, so Falcon leads Red Hulk over to some of these trees, and it makes him feel guilty for being mad, so Red Hulk gives up on the whole smashing thing. It was convenient that these trees were right next to the White House, even though Ross only became president 2 seconds ago, and he and his daughter spent most of their lives in the desert, but whatever. You see, in this movie it's established that Betty doesn't talk to him because of how he treated Bruce, so Ross misses going on these tree walks with her, and we have to pretend that these trees weren't just a last-minute ass-pull contrived plot point, and they are so important to Ross's life that they can stop his Hulk rampage. You see, it was too much to ask for Betty to show up in this scene instead, so they just used some trees, with Betty only showing up briefly in the epilogue after Ross is already in prison. So I can understand why Betty doesn't want to talk to him. Now, why doesn't she talk to anyone else? And why did she disappear for 2 decades? They don't explain that part. Other characters in this film include classic villain Sidewinder of the Serpent Society, played by Giancarlo Esposito. In the comics, the Serpent Society is a largely reoccurring group of villains with various snake-themed powers and abilities, who have faced off against just about every big-name hero within Marvel. In the movies, they are a mercenary organization called Serpent, without the society, and the group is made up of normal people with guns, because that was somehow deemed more exciting. But from where I'm sitting, this just seems like an abysmal failure of creativity to me. The multiverse is okay, but snake villains, that's a bit too far. Marvel would never make anything so ridiculous. I suppose it's also worth mentioning that the head of Ross's Secret Service is credited as being a woman called Sabra, which is a bizarre name drop, as the original character is very obscure, and is pretty much completely different from the movie character in every way. To put it mildly, she looks a bit different in the comics. She is an Israeli mutant with some basic powers like super strength, speed, regeneration, and so on, while being able to transfer her powers to others. But in the movie, she is just yet another Black Widow who switched occupations, with her Israeli background being pretty much irrelevant to her story, likely to avoid polarizing comparisons to current events. But it makes you wonder why they even bothered to make such a deep-cut reference if they weren't going to use any material from the source character whatsoever. You really have to wonder why she's even in this movie, period, because she barely does anything except perform a few goofy fight scenes, in which you have to pretend that this microscopic person can beat up anyone. It's like they purposefully get the least intimidating people possible to play these roles just to piss people off. And yeah, you heard that right. We have another Black Widow, another Hulk, another Falcon, another Captain America, and another Captain America. Everyone is the same person, not an ounce of originality anywhere. Sam Wilson as Captain America was always an unnecessary and unwanted change. Comic fans already spoke with their wallets years ago, and his run with this title didn't last long at all before he became Falcon again. Only then becoming Captain America a second time once the movies made it a thing. But this concept will always fail because Sam Wilson is Falcon and Steve Rogers is Captain America, and that's the way everyone wants it to be because their stories are meant to have meaning, depth, and purpose. But these changes were made without those things, and in their place were vain and shallow attempts at diversity and inclusion, with no deeper reasons to justify this within the context of the story. Steve should never pass the mantle, but if he did, it should be passed down to the other super soldier out of time, who has a similar moral foundation, is in need of a new super persona that isn't stained in blood, and was his original sidekick. The person with these qualities would be Bucky. It's not about race, it's about development. Sam was shown to be a good friend to Steve, and someone he got along well with, but just barely more so than the other Avengers, and Steve never had to put his life on the line to keep Sam around, the way he did with Bucky on multiple occasions. And would you know it, they actually tried to make the Captain Bucky thing work in the comics, after killing Steve off in Civil War, but this change didn't last long, because as it turns out, people just like Steve Rogers, so they brought him back after about a year. It didn't work with Bucky, it didn't work with Falcon, just leave Steve Rogers as Captain America, and stop trying to fix things that aren't broken. It should not be this difficult for these films to make money with this franchise. The comics have nearly a century's worth of good stories to pull from, they just gotta copy the work. For some added context to the overall story, the basic plot line is that Ross has become the president now, and Falcon Squared are invited to the White House, and Sam wants to bring along his other buddy Isaiah. Isaiah's story is that he was also another Captain America in the 50s, because everyone is a damn super soldier now, but you've never heard about him, because the white man held him down for decades, and they locked him up for being too soulful and saintly. Sam hopes to bring this guy some redemption by bringing him to the White House on good terms, but whoopsie, he gets mind controlled to assassinate the president, and goes straight back to jail, thus becoming this film's damsel in distress. So Falcon Squared easily plow their way through the leader's big evil plans in order to clear Isaiah's name. This whole thing happened because the leader is trying to conduct a bunch of politically embarrassing situations at Ross's expense in order to destroy his reputation. Stopping the leader includes taking down Sidewinder, some Japanese fighter jets, and the Red Hulk himself, which is all done rather easily. Nothing about this adventure is particularly deep, surprising, or meaningful, so there isn't really much to say about it. Stuff just happens, and it gets resolved with Stearns and Ross both going to jail, with Ross stepping down as president, like the good little controversial politician that he is. Now, I don't believe this story has any roots in the comics whatsoever, but if it did, it would likely be modern shit, and I couldn't tell you anything about those, because your boy stopped reading new books since 2014 due to their terrible stories and artwork. But we shouldn't be adapting modern comics anyway, because the near century of amazing books that came before have more than earned their right to go first. So when I say just copy the comics, I specifically mean the beloved classics. If you heads at Marvel don't know what those are, then just listen to the fans. We will happily tell you. Do a Grey Hulk prequel. Anyway, that's it. Toodles.